While I'm still young, I can run up bankside. It's easy at first, just running up that hill, arms swinging, heart thumping. Then the steps start, puffing, panting, legs aching, arms swinging. Not far now. Closer, closer, chest aching. Nearly there now. Phew, made it.
In the beginning is the clay. Then there are the flowers, and of course the people, and the village where the people live. Youlgrave, 1937 and 2000. A village set up on the hills above the River Bradford, with Allport to the east of the village and Middleton by Youlgrave to the west. Youlgrave, or is it Youlgrave? There are over 50 different versions of the name since it was first mentioned in the Domesday Book. But still folk can't agree on the name, so we all call it Pommy.
It's just a name, but it come basically from a new instrument. Youlgrave band in its day was a very important thing. It was a prize band, a silver prize band. And they bought a new instrument. It cost a lot of money.
The question asked was, well, you've got your new instrument. Oh, aye. What are they like? Oh, smashing.
And then the people who were going to play it, the two men who were going to play it, was allowed to go and play it every so often.
Well, how do you get on? Well, we took our instruments and we marched straight through village, he says, and we played them. Well, what did you play? Well, we all played pom-pom.
And they said that the only things you could hear Youlgrave band play were boom, 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 pom, 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 boom, 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 pom, 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 pom.
And there's some little pom-poms on the hats. Mm. And I thought that was where they probably got the name from.
I do like to stroll along the prop, 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 with the brass duck playing diddly up, up, up.
A bit off the wall, Youlgrave folk, like our pig, and thereby hangs a tale, several actually.
I investigated this business of pig on the wall like I've investigated a lot of other things.
Well, I can remember, Bill, when I were only a lad this big, and he used to have bowling for pig, and he used to have the skittles under the reading room wall, and the little pig in a box outside of it. And Mr. Moore said that he'd pay for half a barrel of beer, any two men who put the pig on the wall with a blue ribbon round its neck, listen to the band play. Now I know it's true, Bill.
It's a nice story.
I know it's true because I was there.
Youlgrave band were playing and coming up street, and there were two men taking pig down to slaughter. They bred it, they fed it, it was a pet, and they were taking it down to slaughter, and band were coming up. So one of the men bent down and struggled and picked this pig up and put it on the wall. They said, what you done that for? He said, well, I want to hear band play last time before it dies.
This pig escaped, and it stood with its little paws on the wall and was enthralled by the sound made by Youlgrave band. That's what they said.
The ancient custom of well dressing. They look grand for 7 days, then they crumble into dust. Wells and flowers. Everyone gets to work searching the fields, hedges and village gardens. Flowers, moss, sheep's wool, everything to make the perfect well.
I started well dressing when I was a child, actually, gathering flowers, because that's what we were all just allowed to do. We weren't allowed to do anything else, only gather buttercups or anything that they wanted.
At well-dressing, you used to tell me to pick flowers and things.
Yeah, I enjoyed that bit, yeah.
And you can go and search for them and it's fun.
But summer also means escape to the river, where secret games are played, and stolen fruits are always sweetest.
Well, I used to go down on the Middleton side of the river, because my mother was very much against doing it. But we were hungry kids.
We weren't supposed to fish, but we did. We fished. That was down at the bottom of Shetty Lane there. And could put planks up, top plank up, let water go, and walk up and you could feel trout under your feet as he moved, as you got them trapped in their weed, and pick them up and chuck them up bank. Always casting an eye behind you to make sure that the fish barely weren't coming up. But they were a very handy supplement for what we lived on.
What's your biggest fish? Don't make it up either.
Is that big?
No, I don't weigh them, I just eat them.
No, how big like that?
That's my smallest one.
That one.
No, that's my smallest one.
Yeah. What happens when the bailiff comes around?
I'm off up that hill.
Fish aren't the only things in the river. And that's not rubbish in there, it's the boards soaking for the well dressings. Keeps the clay damp, and the water that comes from the hills, our own spring water.
Well, this is the River Bradford. You know that.
Yeah.
And it flows down by your house, Allport. And the Youlgrave spring comes from Blackley Wood. You know that, don't you? Across there. And you know why it was put on? Anna Bowman, a lot of children were getting poorly years ago. And there are no clean water. And she was the instigator of bringing piped water to the village. And we're still doing that to this day. And if you ever went to the spring at night, on a frosty night, he's had a drink from the spring, clear water, it's like just drinking champagne.
Water, the bringing of life to a village. Which is why we celebrate water with our well dressings. A beautiful village, Youlgrave, which is why it was painted by Lucian Pissarro, and also why there was a romantic name for the hanging gardens on Bankside.
Well, we sat here now and looking down behind me, this Valpo Gardens. Valpo being shortage for Valparaiso, which is South America.
Bankside. But other names on Bankside weren't quite so romantic. They tell a very different story.
And I can remember that down here was always a heap of ashes and always a tip. And if you come to know what it was in those days, without the olden days, without a sewerage system, where you had earth lavatories and middens, and people emptied the middens. Sometimes they emptied them into the gardens, and sometimes they carried them, dumped them down here. And it was one reason, I think, why they call this Shetty Lane. When we lived in Alley, if you went down to the bottom of Alley, there were 2 rows of toilets or lavatories. There were 6, I believe, so some of them had to share. But quite a few of them had 2-seaters. So your mother took you down with her when she went. She slapped you down on the seated side of her, at next hole, and performed the actions that were necessary down at the lavatories.
When I was a child, life was fairly hard for us. Mum had a very hard time. There were 3 of us, 3 children. Dad was a meal maker for the Duke of Rutland.
Oh, yes.
And he used to get very wet. Very wet.
He would.
And eventually it turned to pneumonia. And eventually it turned to consumption.
Oh dear.
So we had a struggle. Mum had a struggle. Dad had to go to the hospital. Of course, he never came out.
No.
And my mother was left with us 3 children. No money.
No.
There was no pensions. Nothing from the Duke.
No.
Only to try and get her out of the house.
Oh,
To sell it.
terrible.
And that's how we lived.
My dad was a builder, of course, all weathers, pneumonia, no cure, no M&B, but very good attention from the doctor, who was Dr. Steele. And Dr. Steele was kindness itself, and so were all the people in the village, nearly everybody. Dr. Steele said that someone must have a mustard plaster on his chest, but he recovered. He must have been tough, but on top of everything, he was off for 13 months. Now, all that was coming in, thank God we had Lloyd George, he was getting 10 bob a week from the state. Now, my dad was an odd fella. I mean, we're all odd fellas when it comes to, but he was a member of the Odd Fellows Friendly Society. Now, the beginning, the first month or so, the income from the Odd Fellows was good. But with being off so long, it finally finished up at 2 and 6 a week. So consequently, my mum was left to manage on 12 and 6 a week. Anyway, my dad beat it eventually, but there were a lot of good friends about, and village folk are kind.
Anyway, we could make money, and we did do. There was a chap came to our house one night, or one day, and he bet me a 6pence that I wouldn't come up to this tap naked. It was during winter, run up here naked and fetch a bucket of water. And I did do. And I got 6pence, and I lost it in snow. And 6pence were a lot of money then. It was 12 halfpenny ice creams. But nevertheless, I lost it in snow, but the snow melted and I found it again.
Knocking Alley. An alley where the women knocked the lead out of the stone. Mined across the hill at Morston Mine.
Well, Knocking Alley, it was a row of houses, one up and one down. Occasionally one of them would have one down and 2 bedrooms. But they were mainly occupied by families. In our particular one, there was, as I can remember, there was eight children and mother and father sleeping all in one bedroom.
But in spite of hardship, life had its good moments, and childish devilment, same as today, really.
This was a favourite trick of ours, especially this particular pipe, but there was pipes all over Youlgrave that we had the same point of aggravation. Shove a bit of paper up like that, like the paper. You can hear it. And that's what we call bull roaring.
Best one I've ever done, but I've not done it to anybody yet. Where you wrap dog poo in toilet rolls, light it, knock on someone's door, run off, and then they come out and stamp on it.
And the other one we used to make parcels up, get some manure, because there's always some manure in the roads, and especially old Porcy Ben, as you used to call him, they had horses, you know. And the we used to get so much of this manure, tie it up, make a parcel, and put some writing on it, and because put it down in the road, and somebody come along and open it and find out what was in it.
Was the use of worrying? It never was worthwhile. So pack all your troubles in your own kit bag and smile, smile, smile.
That was my first year.
That was a rat. She's
And I
supposed to
went-
come on with a mask on like that. She didn't put it down and it was up there. So it was
People still come up to me and say, weren't you the rat who left your mask up?
Did you take part in pantomime itself?
Only in one.
Yeah.
I was always backstage. I did painting of scenery and helping to make the outfits. And for many years, I always brewed up the cups of tea. That was, I finished this last year at 37 years of brewing tea.
Well, that was surely being a yoga. That was one of the most important things you did.
Yes, I suppose so.
Making tea.
I was in up to about 6 years ago, I think it was, and I enjoyed every minute of it. Every minute.
On a morning like this, I could kiss everybody. I'm so full of love and goodwill. Let me say furthermore, I adore everybody to come and learn the pleasures mine.
You know, Audrey Dog Daisy, there's at side of the road.
Penny moons.
Eh?
Penny moons.
Oh, I call them Dog Daisies.
Well, go on.
But if you were doing them, you'd pick each petal out separate and put it in, and put the what's your name, the bottom of the petal. You'd start at the bottom, you'd cover that, then the next one would go underneath the top of the petal, because of the simple reason, over the top of the petal. If it rained, the water used to drain up and drain right away down the flower. You've got to put them in the right way, else you soon have it spoiled. Well, he'll know that.
That's where you knock him, you knock him. I put a bit of you.
And he used to help at the reading room. And every night when they finished, he used to go with George. And he used to get drink at night after they finished. And he used to have it put on slate. Because the collecting boxes at the well dressings then, because he used to go to each well, didn't he?
Yeah, well, they had their own money. They collected, yes.
Yeah. Well, they come the end of the week, and they come count boxing names. There weren't enough money in boxes for pay for ale that they had. That's how it used to carry on.
Well,
To cap that story, listen, they got so drunk at the farmyard inn when they were doing the bank top knocking alley thing, and it was what's his name, Peter, walking on the water. And by the time it finished, which was about 2 o'clock in the morning, they'd been joined by some of your fellas from the reading room, and consequently, next morning when they erected this, Peter had sunk halfway down. He was up to his chest in water.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing?
Oh, that's quite old.
Are you playing on this old cage?
Yeah.
You know what it was for? For the miners?
Yeah.
Yes. From the Mawston mine.
Yeah, like...
Cut them down, bring them up.
and down with that.
That's right.
I was with my grandmother in the garden at the top of Brookleton there, and it was a lovely quiet evening, and you could hear lots of things across the valley. And I could remember hearing the chains at the mine when they were bringing the men up.
It was a sad time. May 1932, the Mawston mine, which had been set up after the war, a lot of money poured into it, there was an explosion.
Well, Jack
and my brother George both worked in the mine. And then a knock came on the door at 6 o'clock, and there was a man, and he said, "Mr. Birds, is Jack in? We've got trouble."
I put my nose in and I said, "Is there anything I can do?" And they said, and I took everything in, there were two fellas laid out. One was certainly Ernest Wright. The other one, I was not quite sure in my own mind, it could have been Eric Evans, no, it was Eric Evans, Jack Birds, but I'm not sure.
Jack gets there, goes down mine, and he says, "Where's Eric?" And he said, "He's in mine." He said, "Well, I'll go and find him." He went down mine, half an hour, they were bringing him up dead, both of them gassed. My father walked over to mine. He just got there when they just brought his body up like that. And he said to him, "Well done, lad, thou did thy best." And that's what my father said.
Sweet the name of Jesus sounds in the believer's ear. He soothes his sorrows, heals his wounds, and drives away his fear.
Well, I didn't get very far with it. I practiced a bit, but I used to play for the Sunday school a bit, and then I got playing at the chapel, helping out from one to the other. And at the church, I played for weddings. I'm blowing trumpet a bit, haven't I?
That's all right, carry on,
And
it's right.
I used to play for weddings. And one particular one I played for at Assop, and there's a lady blowing the organ, and she was at the west end of the church. And I got me back to the altar, and she was facing to the altar. When the bride arrived down at the altar, the parson gave the signal that the bride had arrived, you see. And I was halfway through the bridal march, and she kept on blowing the organ and let all the wind out.
I had met Frank at a previous dance in Pryden just a while before, and of course he was there and he offered to bring me home. My friend, Bella name was, she's passed on now, she had to ride back to Youlgrave on a motorbike, but Frank had only got a cycle, so I'd got a long dance dress on. I pulled it up, put a scarf round, he'd come home on his crossbar, and it struck 4 o'clock in the morning, you know, while the church clock we come down. Of course we both climbed through the window at the back there. Alice knows where that is. And I just changed out of my dance dress into uniform because I had to be on duty at 6 cleaning the front rooms ready for the people to get up and have their breakfast, you see.
I met my husband through the band, and that's how I met Ray. And we were married in 1939, and of course it was the year before the war broke out. And then in 1940 he was called up to go into the army, and in 1942 he was taken a prisoner of war in the Japanese hands. And so I didn't see him for 3.5 years, and I didn't know if he was alive or not. I was 17 months before I knew he was even alive. He'd been taken a prisoner in the February. And then, of course, I just had a card, and it was 14 months old to say that he was a prisoner in Japanese hands, and just 15 words on the card, that was all.
But at the end of the war, life came back to the village, and so did the well dressings, but with a few changes.
And there were no women allowed to dress before the war, and it was only about 1948 to 9 that the Mrs. Fell, she started
49, I think. Yes.
Dressing, and she more or less introduced the ladies, and it was all ladies that used to dress that one at the top.
Yeah.
When it got to this Coldwell, which was the last one to be reinstated, and I took it on then, which was 45 years ago this year, and still at it, and several of my team actually started with me and are still helping me.
So Margaret passes on her skills to Iris, a newcomer to well dressing design. And in the cold light of dawn, the well is raised to face the world for the first time. So the tradition of well dressing is handed on, as it was from Teddy Shimble at the beginning of the century to Jim Shimble at the end. So wells and their creators crumble into dust, but they both live on.
It was the beginning of the hill, but not just the beginning of the hill, the beginning of me. So first I crawled, on and on, up the hill. Years passed by, I learned to walk, so I began to walk, on and on, up the hill. In my youth my energy flowed, so then I ran, on and on, up the hill. I began to slow down as time went on, my pace had become a weakened stride. I stumbled, on and on, up the hill. I reached the top of that great big hill, and looked back at my memories of life in Youlgrave.
Oh, you know, the girls did the most talking.
Well, no, we did a lot
They
of
got
talking.
this stick, didn't
Oh,
they?
we did a lot of talking, yes.
Jesus loves me, this I know, for Red Elsie told me so.
Just like Jim.
Bad lad.